Well, you know, a question we often get here at the Extension office is, as it relates to lawn care, to home turf care and so on, is how do I control these weeds that are hitting my lawn? And there are a lot of things that you can do to control weeds, but probably one of the first things that a homeowner, anybody maintaining their own turf needs to do is kind of at least identify what kind of weed they have in terms of categories of weeds. And basically, weeds fall into two categories botanically. You have broadleaf weeds. And here's an example of a broadleaf weed. It's a dandelion. Here's another example of a broadleaf weed, something known as broadleaf plantain. And broadleaf weeds generally are going to have leaves that are wider than they are long, and they're called broadleaf. And the veins sometimes run, you know, not necessarily parallel, but semi-parallel or obliquely down the leaf blade. And then when you look at a grass weed, that's the second type botanically, then a grass blade or a grass weed is a kind of grass. And grasses have blades that are generally longer than they are wide, and they have veins in them that run parallel to the leaf blade. So here's an example of a summertime grass weed, which is just common crabgrass. So identifying whether it's a grassy weed or a broadleaf weed is probably one of the first steps in terms of getting a good handle on how to control those things. Now, there is a third category of weed that sometimes can be confused with grasses, and it's known as a sedge. Okay, and the primary sedge that we have around here is something called nut sedge. If we can walk right over here, we'll take a look at some nut sedge and show you what the difference is between it and also between it and the grasses. But nut sedge is one that people will often mistake for a grass because it has some of those same characteristics that a grass has. From the standpoint, it has blades that are much longer than they are wide, just like a grass has. But it's not a grass and it's not a broadleaf, it's a sedge. And the sedges, especially the nut sedges, have very glossy, shiny leaf tissue. They're not hairy, okay? They don't have any hairs on the leaf at all. And they have a really sharp mid-vein that comes down the center of this thing. It almost folds the leaf almost in half. And you flip it on the back side of it, and it's a distinct ridge where that mid-vein goes down. And the blades on this nut sedge come out in groups of 3 from the base of it. And you think, well, okay, so what's the big deal? It's either a sedge or a grass, so what difference does it make? Well, the difference is if you're trying to control nut sedge with a herbicide and you're using a grass material on it, it's not going to have any impact at all. You're going to be awfully frustrated, and you're going to think, well, the stuff doesn't work like it's supposed to, and so on and so on. And you'll spend your time and you'll spend your money and not get any results from it simply because you misidentified it. So from that standpoint, you know, we go back to those 3 types of weeds. We have a grassy weed, an example of the crabgrass, and here is the broadleaf plantain, a broadleaf weed, and then a nut sedge, and that's an example of a sedge, okay? So once you can identify at least what category they fall into, that's probably the main thing that you need to do to help be able to control those. Now, you think about controlling weeds, probably the very best, and we're talking about a turf, a home lawn setting, probably the absolute best defense is a good, dense stand of turf grass. 2 plants can't occupy the same place at the same time. And if you have all or most of your ground covered up in desirable plants, there's no room there for undesirable plants, like these weeds. So that's the first thing. You want to manage your turf grass to the best of your ability. Now, one way that you always have of controlling weeds is to physically remove them. If you dig those weeds up out of the ground and you get enough root and so on, then you've done a good job and that weed's dead. That one will never bother you again. On this dandelion, look at that long root there. That's a long root. It's kind of a taproot. And we look over here at this broadleaf plantain, this one right here, and you see the difference in them. The plantain has a fibrous root, whereas the dandelion has this fleshy taproot. And the point of that is, let's say you're going to hand pull this dandelion. If you pop the top off that, which is very easy to do when you're pulling out of the ground, and you leave that much root in the ground, then that dandelion will regenerate itself from that root and come back. And so you've got some pretty good exercise out in the sun by pulling the tops off of it. You hadn't done a whole lot as far as controlling that weed because it will come back. So if you're going to pull those weeds or physically remove them with your hand pulling or using a mechanical weeding device or whatever, you want to get just as much root as possible. And it's easier to do with the fibrous roots than it is with the tap roots. So if hand pulling is not necessarily going to be the best option, if you've got so much weed pressure that you can't pull them all up, then you look at using a post-emergent herbicide. And that a post-emergent just means that it's applied post or after the weed is already up and growing. And there are a lot of products that are out there designed for homeowners that show an awful lot of efficacy against a broad spectrum of those broadleaf weeds. And what you're primarily looking for is something that's called a selective herbicide. And by selective, what I mean by that is it'll select and have activity against these broadleaf weeds like the plantain and like the dandelion, but it won't harm the desirable turf grass. So it selects for the weed, but does not have any harmful activity against the desirable turf grass. So it's called a selective herbicide. And there are a lot of different brands and products out there available. But one thing they all have in common is they use a very similar mix of active ingredients or actual chemicals to do the work. And if a homeowner or anybody that's looking for, a good product to go in and control broadleaf weeds in their turf grass, I suggest they look for a product that has 2 or more active ingredients in it. And you'll see a long list of potential active ingredients, things such as 2,4-D, another material called MCPP, another one called MCPA. You'll see things like dicamba and so on. And a combination of those products, okay, 2 or more of those, tends to do a better job of controlling a broader spectrum of weeds.
Hi, my name is Anthony Tugg. I'm the Extension Agent County Director of the Rutherford County Extension Program. We are here today in our demonstration garden where actually our 4-H'ers in the county are actually growing different types of vegetables. And these vegetables can be grown in any home garden. For a lot of homeowners, over the past 2 to 3 years, we've seen a big interest in growing fresh home vegetables. And a lot of people have called in and want to know for the first time, what can they grow, how can they get started growing. One of the first things I like to talk to people about when first getting started, make sure you select a good site where you can actually have good sunlight. Gardens typically need anywhere from 6 to 8 hours sunlight per day, and after that we can actually work the beds and actually get plants into the garden where they can actually grow well. And secondly, what you want to do is basically have a soil test. Find out what nutrients are available in the soil, and we can do soil tests here at the Rutherford County Extension Office. Then you'll get the results back on your pH, and also it will tell you how much nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium you have available in your soil, so that way we can basically know how to fertilize your garden. But some of the things we can actually grow in our area here are some of the common vegetables we have. We can actually grow a lot of different types of beans. Beans are real common type of vegetable that we actually grow. We can grow bush type beans, purple hub peas for some of the types of beans and different things like that. But one of the most common vegetables we grow a lot of, and the most common vegetable that's grown in most gardens throughout the United States are tomato plants. And there are a lot of different types of tomatoes we can actually grow in a lot of different varieties we can actually grow in. And one other thing, when you're thinking about growing tomatoes or some of the other crops like cucumber, something we like to do is basically have those plants staked up. And what we decide to do here is something we can use over and over again. We decide to use livestock panels and have our tomatoes actually tied to these livestock panels. We just basically use a little small, simple string, and basically as the plant continues to grow up, we'll continue to tie those up versus some of those poles or other type of stakes. We can use these over and over, and we're not worried about them breaking. The purpose of having some type of trellis is very important to get good air circulation in the plants. Because as these plants continue to grow and they get more and more foliage on them, they will have a tendency to shade the plant out. And by having them staked and keep them from laying on the ground, you'll reduce some of the disease pressures and things like that. But it also gives good air circulation throughout the plant, where you can also, by doing that, you'll reduce your insect and disease population, so you won't have to spray the plants as often. So this type of trellis or some other type of staking mechanism would be great for tomatoes and also for cucumbers, and we do as well. And we'll look at the same thing on the other side in a minute. Another real popular plant is basically we grow a lot of, and they're very easy to grow, are peppers. Whether they're bell pepper, jalapeno peppers, you name it, you can actually grow them very easily here in the Middle Tennessee area. So we do a lot of those. So those are real common. Another vegetable that's grown a lot in the South that's very easily to grow and very common is squash. Can be actually grown very easily. Cucumbers. Another favorite a lot of people like is fried okra. Okra is one that grows really well. Kind of a caution for growing okra, they produce a lot. So I wouldn't put a lot of plants out when growing okra. What you want to do really is basically put a few plants out because they will produce a lot throughout the summer time frame. But we could just kind of move over here. We kind of see that same trellis that we actually have for some other plants as well. And we kind of walk through, we can see different types of beans and some other things that are planted. We also have some other crops out here as well that's real common, that easily to grow. Down on this end, basically you can kind of see we got some cucumbers planted, and basically what they're going to do is once the cucumber plants come up, what they're going to do is basically we're going to tie those to this trellis as well, and basically then we'll kind of avoid once they get mature and big enough, we won't have to reach to the ground and pick those up. We can actually pick them off the trellis, and that's another good thing about a good, strong, steady trellis. Basically, it won't break and bend once they get a good crop on those. So a good trellis is very important. Again, same purpose, to reduce the insect and disease by having good air circulation to move throughout those plants. I think another favorite besides the top tomatoes, peppers, squash, and cucumber and okra, another favorite that a lot of people like to grow and do it quite well with are watermelons. Basically, you can kind of see we have a couple of things of watermelon that you want to actually grow and produce. We do want to keep in mind if you're basically growing watermelon or any of the cucurbic crops, and I think cucurbics, we're talking about watermelon, pumpkins, and things like that. They need a lot of space to run. Because basically they're going to put out long runners and they're going to take up a lot of space. So it's not real ideal to actually have those cucurbic crops in a small area where you don't have room to run, where they won't have room to run and take over a certain, because they will grow into your peppers or squash and other types of things like that also. So that's a good way to do that. And also we think about cucumbers, they would kind of run and take over space as well. That's kind of why we put them up on a trailer, so we can be easily mobile that way. But as the trend continues for people to grow fresh home vegetables in their home gardens, we provide a lot of service for helping them with site selection, helping with getting a good soil test, as well as problem solving. And one thing you may notice out here as well, once a week we do come out on a regular basis and they remove different types of weeds. What weeds actually, we can do them hand pull weeds out, or you can use a hoe or something like that to remove the weeds. The good thing about removing the weeds from around the plant is basically that these weeds, as you continue to water and fertilize these plants through the growing season, they will have a tendency to compete for those same nutrients that the plants need. So weed control is very important. So you want to make sure you remove those weeds and other type of problems as well. Because a lot of times, not only weeds competing for those nutrients, they are also can basically be a place to store insects, come and feed on those plants and basically infect your plants that way. So that's kind of some of the trends that we're seeing and some of the things that we're seeing in our garden. But again, if they need any help with any of these services, they are welcome to call us at the Rutherford County Extension Office at 615-898-7710.